Near the summit of Mount Everest, up in the death zone, on the edge of the north face, there's a cave the climbers call Old Green Boots. Climbing towards the summit, some mountaineers like to stop and pay their respects to the Indian climber who lies preserved in the ice exactly where he perished 10 years ago, with his green boots marking his grave. Nobody ever mentions his name, nor discusses how he died. His body is regarded as a warning they can expect no mercy in the death zone. On the morning of May 14, 2006, a group of mountaineers were shocked to find another climber, frozen but still alive and sitting next to green boots. Believing there was nothing they could do, they decided to leave the stricken man and carry on. The repercussions of what appeared to be a callous act will remain with them forever. They were condemned by commentators and the media.
New Zealand climber Mark Inglis became the first double amputee.
Questions of morality have been raised after mountaineers
commercial mountaineering made climbing the world's most heartless
Mark Inglis
pursuit.
became a pariah in the climbing world
effort to save stricken British climber Дэвид Шарп on Mount Everest last week.
The first man to summit Everest, Sir Edmund Hillary, judged it the selfish behaviour of a modern generation of climbers.
Their aim is to get to the summit, and the welfare of anybody on the way is just too bad.
It wasn't just anyone that criticised me, you know, it was my childhood hero, you know, well, it was my hero, still is, Sir Ed.
I think Mark Inglis was a bit crazy.
The criticism stung, but what stung even more was that people were voicing opinions on no information of what it was like.
More than 30 people walked past the stricken man that night, and yet a double amputee, Mark Inglis, was the only one blamed for not helping him. What really happened on Everest? Does summit fever turn human beings into heartless machines? Or did Sir Edmund Hillary get it all wrong?
The hardest thing is to think that people think that you would walk past a dying person and not help them if you could.
The 2006 season was shaping up to be one of the best on record. Hundreds of mountaineers, hoping to reach the summit by way of the northeast ridge, were encouraged by forecasts of good weather and perfect conditions. They were anticipating the moment when they would join the ranks of elite mountaineers who had stood on the roof of the world. An assault on Everest begins with acclimatization to the lack of oxygen. The climbers establish a series of camps in stages to the summit. The final push takes them into the death zone, an environment so hostile the body, starved of oxygen, starts to eat itself. The lungs and brains swell, and exposed flesh can instantly freeze.
Why Everest? Well, it's the pinnacle, really. It's the highest. And if you can stand on top of that hill, then the amount of power that it can give you for the rest of your life is just, you know, if you can do that, then, geez, you can do anything.
Mark Inglis was one of a team of 4 New Zealanders who would attempt to match the achievement of Sir Edmund and stand on the summit of Everest. Mark Woodward, or Woody, had already summited Everest twice. On this expedition, he was responsible for leading the team to the summit.
Mountaineering challenges you mentally, it challenges you physically. It's almost getting down to the core of what living is about. You cut away all the extra stuff in life and it's just you and survival, testing your skills against Mother Nature. It's also a spiritual thing too. You know, when you are up high on a mountain like that, you feel like you're up there with the gods.
Mark Ingles's legs were designed and built by Wayne Alexander, or Cowboy, who was also attempting Everest for the first time.
On a personal level, I guess you're looking for a place where you can perhaps find or confront fear. I think any time you take on nature, you're exposing yourself to things beyond your control. That's the beauty of it, you know. It does make you feel a part of something that's hard to get any other way.
Mountaineering is a very, very selfish thing to do, and I wanted Everest to be more than just me climbing it. And so what I wanted to do was to raise money for the Cambodia Trust, a group who I work with in Cambodia with the landmine, the polio victims, 100,000 amputees or more. What we did was we raised almost $80,000. $80,000 buys an awful lot of legs.
Mark Fetu had been to the summit of Everest 4 times and shared a special bond with Inglés.
We've both sustained frostbite through climbing. Stumpy and Gimpy sort of came from somewhere between Inglés and myself. I can't quite remember where that came from, but yeah, he's Stumpy, I'm Gimpy. Well, I guess Stumpy is because of the fact he's got 2 stumps and I'm the Gimp because I've only lost my toes.
Fetu was working as a cameraman for Russell Bryce, who operates one of the biggest and most expensive expedition companies on Everest.
People come here to Everest and they spend a huge amount of time, money and effort to be here, and they often throw caution to the wind. And it's partly my job to try and keep these people cautious so they don't make false judgments.
There's a lot of debate on how much you pay when you go to Everest. You know, some people pay very little. I think the minimum you can pay is about $8,500 US. And then, you know, Russell's one of the most expensive. You know, it cost me $50,000 US.
One of those who opted not to spend his money with Russell Bryce was Englishman Дэвид Шарп. He chose a budget expedition with Asian Trekking, who provided little more than the necessary permit for his 3rd attempt on Everest. Sharp's friend, Jamie McGuinness, had been with him on the mountain before.
David just wanted to book with anybody who would take him. Asian Trekking had a mix of people who wanted to climb independently. He didn't care what he was getting. All he needed was food at base camp, ABC, the yaks up, the gear up, and then the opportunity to climb by himself. Critically, he didn't have a radio.
A lot of people actually like to climb the mountain themselves without any Sherpa support or any technology. And I actually support that. I think it's still great to see. However, things do go wrong, and what happened to Дэвид Шарп happens every year, every season on Everest.
Many of the people who climb Everest, you can call them commercial mountaineers in that they climb with groups. David was a real mountaineer.
Sharp had already made an impression with a stylish ascent of the world's 6th highest mountain, Человек.
He was capable of climbing Everest, no doubt. But once you know that you can do it, you've just actually got to do it. The main issue that we discussed was oxygen. He really hoped to climb Everest without oxygen. Climbing without extra bottled oxygen is extremely dangerous. Everybody knows that. Danger and glory perhaps go hand in hand.
I don't run that style of expedition, and of course I wouldn't have allowed Дэвид Шарп to go up by himself. His style of doing the expedition is personal judgment. Maybe he wanted to make a statement in life.
We used to joke that David was a rocket scientist. He really was, but he was getting out of that. He wanted to become a teacher.
By an accident of fate, on the afternoon of May 13, Mark Inglés took a shot of the summit he hoped to reach the next day. Most of the mountaineers who had made their summit bid were descending, but in the distance was a lone climber who was defying all the rules and heading for the summit late in the afternoon. For Mark Fetu, this brought back memories of a fatal mistake.
12 years ago, I was involved personally in similar circumstances, going for the summit very late in the afternoon with a friend, Mike Reinberger. I was filming him, and he was very reluctant to turn around before getting to the summit. And at one point he said, "Oh, look, we'll bivvy on the way down." I was not keen on that idea, but I didn't want to leave him either. So I continued. We summited very late, so we had to bivouac and spend the night out, virtually 70 to 80 metres from the summit. So it was a ridiculously high bivouac. The climb took its toll.
Just keep moving down. Just keep moving down. Yeah.
And on the way down, Mike was struggling to stay upright and walk. He was blind, quite serious stages of cerebral edema where you do become blind. I had to leave Mike. I tried my hardest to help a friend down. Through that I lost all my toes, and I think I'm pretty lucky to be still alive.
From the beginning of mountaineering history, Everest has had a fearful reputation.
Nobody in those days knew what really high altitude meant. Could one even live at such heights? Nobody knew.
Since British schoolmaster George Lee Mallory said in 1924 that he would climb Everest because it's there, and then vanished in the clouds, Everest has claimed more than 200 lives. Mallory's body remains, a frozen memorial, there because it was there. It wasn't until 1953, 29 years after Mallory died on his third expedition to Everest, that New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay reached the summit. Tales of the feat that earned Hillary a knighthood were like fodder for generations of school children like Дэвид Шарп. To New Zealand kids like Mark Inglis, Sir Ed was a god, and like him, they desired to attain the highest altar of mountaineers.
I guess every Kiwi kid has a dream, to be an All Black or to follow in the footsteps of Sir Ed. I was never going to be an All Black, you know, I was a scrawny little runt, you know, but, you know, that made for a good climber, you know, it meant that I could follow in the footsteps of Sir Ed.
With his ambition firmly in sight, Mark Inglis became a search and rescue mountaineer on Mount Cook, New Zealand's highest mountain. It was climbing there in 1982 that he nearly lost his life.
You know, it was a decision that Phil Dool and I made to carry on climbing into a storm, and that we thought we'd be able to just sneak down the other side of Mount Cook and get out of the wind. And we happened to strike one of the worst storms in recorded history at Mount Cook. We just snuck into this wee cave near the summit to get out of the wind, and the wind just didn't stop. The wind didn't stop for 13 and a half days.
24 years ago, searchers fought blizzard conditions for 2 weeks to rescue Mark Inglis from Mount Cook. A helicopter crashed. The crew narrowly escaped with their lives.
There's strong winds blowing up through here, but they've got shelter back in behind here.
The men named their ice cave Middle Peak Hotel. It was 2 weeks before they were rescued.
Yep, you know, I've been rescued before. I know what it's like. But I also knew why we sat there for 13 and a half days, because it would have put our rescuers' lives at risk to come up and try and get us at any other time. The result of Middle Peak Hotel was some pretty severe frostbite. The whole 4 foot frozen completely. After a month in hospital, got wheeled into theatre and had both legs amputated, about 140 millimetres under the knee. So many people ask about how do you train for Everest, you know? Well, for me, the best training that I ever had was Middle Peak Hotel.
After weeks of acclimatization, the team are preparing for the assault on the summit. They will leave Camp 4 and spend at least 12 hours in the death zone, battling the blind forces of nature in their attempt to reach the summit and return. The Northeast Ridge route is divided into 3 waypoints: first step, second step, third step, and then the summit. On the route to the first step, they will also pass Green Boots Cave.
The whole of the expedition just leads up to one day, to summit day. You know, when you start to get your gear ready to set off at 11, it's like walking into an exam.
Bloody cold, yeah.
It's walking into an exam that the consequences of failing, too horrible to think.
Everything was feeling good, with one exception that it was so cold. It was a really, really severe morning.
As soon as you're going, it's great. But for me, it's just getting the legs on, and it's the toughest time.
Yeah. Our intention was actually to leave at about 1 o'clock in the morning, but we brought that forward by 2 hours. We're away from our Camp 4 at about 20 past 11.
You should be ahead of the other teams on the road, huh?
Yeah, Russell, we're setting off pretty soon.
I had a quick chat with Russell on the radio just to let him know that we were going. In fact, he was saying, come on, you should be going. He wanted us out of there by 11.
How's Mark doing? How's Inglis doing up there?
He's out of here.
Monitoring the expedition's every move, Russell Bryce maintains radio contact from Camp 2, over 1,000 metres below.
He's your extra ears, he's your extra eyes, he's the touchstone, really.
The first of Russell's team to leave that night was Max Chaya, on his quest to become the first person from Lebanon to stand on the summit.
Good luck.
Max was right out in front. He'd taken off, and he had about a 20-minute lead on us.
Okay, cowboy, you ready? Georgie?
We got ahead of the pack. We were all pretty much moving together as a group. Our biggest problem was that there was a lot of other people keen to be going for the summit that day as well, and it almost becomes a bit of a rush so that you're not going to get caught up in any traffic jams.
Turned out to be around 35 to 40 people all up, and we were right at the front, which was great.
You're moving in a line all the way to the summit on a fixed rope, and it is a wee bit like a train. It stops and it starts. The carriages all, in a sense, through osmosis, almost pull each other through.
When it's that cold, you need to keep moving, to keep warm, to just be able to maintain a reasonable sort of body temperature. It's much, much easier at altitude to get frostbite.
Whenever I stopped, even just for a minute, for seconds, to try and warm my hands, Dorji would be right behind, hitting my pack. Mark, get moving, don't stop, you cannot stop. You cannot stop today. And Dorji's a guy that's, he'd climbed Everest 5 times before. This was going to be his 6th ascent. I saw the nervousness in Dorji. I saw the nervousness in Fetu about the conditions that day. It was just so brutally cold.
Well, the lead up to Green Boots Cave is very exposed. You go up what's known as the exit gullies out of Camp 4, and it's relatively steep, angled snow climbing in the dark, up fixed right, and that leads you to the summit ridge. And then you go into a series of ledges that you must traverse. And this is on the summit ridge at 8,500 metres. And you have what's known as the Kanchung face on your left, and that drops 2,000 or 3,000 metres at a fairly extreme angle down to the glacier. And on your right, below your feet, you have the whole of the north face of Everest, and that again is dropping down approximately 2,500 metres to the valley floor. And a slip or a trip or if you miss clipping a fixed rope, you are going to take what everybody calls as the grand tour, and that's all the way to the bottom.
Even in the dark, it's just this big black hole. As you look over into the King Shung face, it's like, whew, you know, it's you get this sort of sense of evil. It's a tough place. In some cases, your feet were completely out over the drop. I mean, I'd worked out a plan that even if both legs broke, you know, I could still walk on my knees, you know? But then you start going around some of those traverses, especially into the bottom of the second step. And if you can't walk, there would be no way you could ever get around those. No way on your knees. You could never carry someone around there. There's this incredible focus that if you stuff up here, no one's going to be able to get you down.
One of the harder sides of Summit Day is that you do encounter dead people. There are bodies up there that can't be moved or removed because of the nature of the terrain. It's very steep. It's horrendously exposed. So there are bodies that you occasionally have to either climb over or try to climb or walk around.
In my first time in summiting in 04, we walked past 6 dead bodies. I mean, it was a shocker.
Green Boots is a climber that died in 1996, I think, on the way down. You know, like a lot of people do, on the way down. Like so many of the bodies on the north side of Everest, you know, the minute that you die, you stop being flesh and blood and you become part of the mountain. You know, you can't be moved, you adhere to the frozen rock. The surprise was seeing that he had company.
Come here.
I felt desperately sorry for whoever it was in there. You know, the level of frostbite was tragic.
And then the first thing that came to mind was you were the guy I saw yesterday afternoon high on the summit slope. I just sort of recognised what he must have done. He'd got to the summit late, he was alone, and I figured that most likely coming down he ended up descending in the dark, which of course is dangerous when you're on your own. It's possible that his headlamp batteries had died, and so he stopped up for the night. He found this cave and he crawled in there, and I thought that was a pretty sensible thing to do, considering the circumstances. But it was so cold that I then realised, you know, I mean, he was still alive, he was breathing. I could see breath coming out through the front of his jacket. I guess he was waiting to be able to see the way back down to Camp 4. Unfortunately for him, it was the coldest night of the season.
Hey, get moving. It's late, it's all the way back to Camp 4.
But I yelled at him and said, look, get going. I literally said, get a move on, mate. There's all these headlamp lights all the way back down to camp, and it would be very easy to follow them down without getting lost.
I realised that, well, we don't know who he is. He certainly looked more dead than alive. And my primary responsibility is to the clients and the people that are with me. Well, this is also 1 o'clock in the morning. If any rescue was to have happened, it wouldn't have happened till daytime. It's a horrible thing to have to just walk past, but that's the reality of it. And this was a big shock to Cowboy. He'd never seen, you know, dead bodies and or somebody in this sort of a predicament.
Coming across someone stricken, incredibly sort of whipped away by the harshness of the environment. It was incredibly uncomfortable. It was horrible. It's the worst thing I've seen in my life. I became transfixed. Then there was movement. It was just a small movement of the head, but in something that's lifeless, seemingly lifeless, it's a huge movement. It's just because it represents life. This desire to be tactile with someone in such need was drawing me right to him, and to the point where, you know, I really wanted to touch, but there's this dignity in death that makes it hard to touch someone. But I said, God bless and rest in peace, because I knew, you know, we were leaving him. That people who knew about these things had seen this before, and they're qualified to make that decision. They had made it. We were leaving him. We were moving on. And that's what happened.
It's a hard thing to explain, and it's not an easy decision to make to have to go past somebody like that, but that's what it takes. You know, that's the hard calls that you sometimes have to make in mountaineering. If you're going to have an accident up there, you need to be walking, you need to be conscious to be rescued.
The only rule really is to climb. And keep climbing. Don't stop climbing. Climbing up, climbing down, just keep climbing.
To have suddenly stopped and abandoned everything, that decision wasn't really up to me. That would be Russell. I would have had to have, you know, really got more communication going with Russell to sort of say, hey, you know, should we try and help this guy?
I think I heard some radio traffic.
Yeah, copy, North Cole. There's another body in Green Boots Cave.
As we travelled on, I made a call to Russell on the radio.
Well, people are telling me that Woody sent me a message from Green Boots, and lots of people tell me that they sent lots of radio calls to me. I monitor every radio conversation I have. I make a bullet point in a diary and make a time note. So, of course, if someone was going to say that they'd seen somebody or seen a problem at that stage, I would have noticed that, and I certainly never ever received any record of that.
The log shows a radio transmission from there back to North Cole anyway. I think Perba made a call, and about 1 a.m.
I don't have a record of that, and I don't understand what Cowboy was on about. He talked to me about conversations that he had that I never ever had.
You sit everyone down that was there that day, and you'll get an equal number of different stories. From my memory, I used the radio. I got a reply to move on. There's nothing that I could do to help. Now, I'm not sure whether it was from Russell or from someone else, or whether, you know, it's just hypoxia and it's in your mind.
At Mushroom Rock, we certainly made another transmission to Russell, which he received.
If I'd received a message that Дэвид Шарп was in trouble at that time of the morning, yes, maybe I could have done something. Who knows? The day might have been totally different if there'd been a different radio call and so on.
Yeah, had we? Or did I mention it again? You see, it's amazing how your memory clouds. You know, sometimes I think, oh, you know, I'm sure I mentioned it again. But, yeah, obviously it never really got received, so.
It remains a mystery why Russell Bryce did not receive any of the radio calls about Дэвид Шарп, but did receive other messages that night. But another bigger question has never been answered. Why didn't any of the other 30 or so people who passed Дэвид Шарп on the way to the summit stop and try and rescue him?
From what I can gather, some people thought that he was dead, some people thought that he was a dead body that they were expecting to see there. In any case, a lot of people didn't see him at all, and others thought that he was beyond recovery, I suppose. I wasn't there. It's a question that is hypothetical. I don't know.
Later, on the descent, many of the mountaineers would encounter Sharp again. Mark Ingles's focus shifted to his own survival. A broken valve in his mask meant much of the oxygen he took in each breath was leaking out. With less oxygen to warm his body on the bitterly freezing day, continuing to the summit would almost certainly result in serious frostbite.
It was such a tough day that any effect that green boots and the body in the cave had on you disappeared within 5 steps. But the understanding that you didn't want to end up like that stayed with you for the whole climb.
We carry on across round this big traverse into the base of this famous part of the route is this ladder bolted up and held in place to get over what's really considered to be a almost impossible section of rock to try to climb at that altitude.
And you look up at the second step, and it's just like this big ship's prow that rears up over you. And I went, bugger!
It's technical, it's just awkward. The fact that Mark's got these legs on, it was really awkward for him.
Oh, no. Go.
Your hands up higher, mate. Gotta get you over that.
Hey, what's that, Fido?
Get your hands up higher, mate.
Okay.
I think he just had that real heavy heart that he was holding everybody up. So I think he was starting to get really angry.
Bugger it! Oh, Mark, you'll get it. Okay, nice and tight. Yeah, good man, good man, good man.
And that's what worked. He got angry and he managed to figure it out and got it on the 3rd attempt.
Yes. Run.
As you're climbing the ladder and you step right out, and there is absolutely nothing under your feet. You're looking straight down, 2,500, 3,000 metres straight down the north face of Everest. The consequences of falling off the ladder just don't bear thinking about. There's been a lot of people that have died around there. In fact, what they call it Rainbow Valley. There's the slopes down beneath the second step because you can see the different coloured down from all the bodies, the people that have fallen from there. It goes from being a physical mountain below the second step, it goes to being this real mental mountain above the second step. It's just so slow, you're only 100 metres vertical from the summit of Everest, but it's going to take you a couple of hours. Getting desperately tired. It's daylight now. You're still looking down at your feet, but it's not the big black hole anymore. It's all the way down to the wrong book, It's all the way down the north face. With the oxygen not working, it was just getting desperately hard. And I just stood to one side and let the guys go past.
Inglis's situation was now critical. Lack of oxygen was affecting his decision-making. With only a few hours left in his tank to get to the summit and back, he had to ignore extreme pain from his stumps as ambition drove him forward.
The anomaly of that particular night, I set my altimeter at Camp 4 to 8,200 metres where our camp is, and when I checked it on the summit it was reading 9,000 metres. So what was actually happening is we're having what's called an atmospheric low, where the mountain was actually sticking out of the atmosphere, so space had come down to meet us, and that's why it was so horrendously cold.
And you just keep going, you know, you're just chanting to yourself, 5 steps and stop, 5 steps and stop. Well, it's actually, you chant a damn sight slower than that. And then all of a sudden, there's absolutely nothing in front of you. You know, how do you know you're on the top of the world? You don't have this revelation of a summit. There's just nothing in front of you. There was one other thought, and that's, you know, I've shared a footstep with Sir. Only one, you know, but it's the right one. It was the one right on the very top. He came up from the south, I came up from the north. It's just that one footstep that counts.
Yeah, it was a very sober happy. It wasn't an intoxicating happy, it was a very sober happy. There's a sense of pride, and you know, there were 4 of us there on the summit that day. You know, there was 3 Marks and a cowboy.
It was a fantastic moment for 4 Kiwis.
With most of his oxygen depleted and his fingers frostbitten, the critical challenge now was descent. And it's during the descent that most of the fatal mistakes occur.
For me, especially, climbing down's much, much harder than climbing up. And as soon as I started moving down, I knew this was going to be a very long day. You could feel that you were doing a bit of damage. Second step, the ropes at the top of the ladder are just an absolute nightmare. I was just so focused on not getting a crampon caught in it. Now, you get a crampon caught in it, you just fall over backwards, you know? And yeah, I'll just pop out of my legs, actually. Not a good look. Climbed down the ladder, stopped partway down, you know, put an arm through a rung, and, you know, I'm still panting, you know, I'm still got the mask off to try and do the technical climbing, then putting the mask on to try and suck some O's. On down the ladder. And that was when we really started to think, hey, we're going to get back to where that poor bugger was this morning.
The other member of the Russell Bryce team, Max Chaya, who'd been first to leave Camp 4 that day, did become the first Lebanese citizen to summit Everest. On his way up, Max had not seen the man in the cave, but now in the sunlight, he couldn't miss Sharp and his red boots. Chaya radioed Bryce.
Russell, it's Max.
This time the message was received by Russell.
Yes, Max, this is Russell. Go ahead.
Who was listening and watching from below. Also listening on the radio network were all the other expeditions, and they heard it as well.
Max, I can see where you are.
I can see where you are on the hill.
I was looking through our telescope, and he described to me a man that was pretty much dead.
Is he talking, Max?
Is he able to talk?
No, negative.
And in actual fact, during our conversation, which was taking something like 20-odd minutes, Max said, oh, no, the man's died. He's stopped shivering and he's died. And then Max comes along and says, oh, no, he's come alive again.
Mate, I know this is hard, but...
It's going to take 20 fresh guys to get him down the hill. I've been monitoring your oxygen and you've only got 2 hours left, so I'd like you to leave him now. Come on down, Max.
I couldn't see any help readily available on the entire mountain.
I had heard Russell talking to Max and insisting that Max keep going. When I got to the cave where Dave Sharp was, to me he hadn't moved. And this is now probably 9 hours later, and it was obvious that he was almost dead.
It was just excruciating to watch. To be in that position, to be that vulnerable and helpless, and not have not have those, not have much of a grip on your life left, much of a grip at all, apart from being almost, I'm not sure, I've just, the same process occurred, I stopped, saw the others coming, and I moved on. And that's, I guess, my regret, is that I didn't touch him. Just to make the tiniest of tiny differences.
Max did what he could. Then some of our other Sherpas did the best that they could. They moved him out into the sun, out of this alcove. They found some spare oxygen. Then David did respond.
Well, Paul Batashi is probably the strongest Sherpa on the mountain at the moment, and he is with another Sherpa from the Turkish team. And Paul Batashi did try to help David Sharp, and it took him about 25 minutes to move 4 steps before they put him down again. So here's 2 extremely strong Sherpas going, there's no way we can rescue this man.
For a moment, the stricken man recovered enough to talk. In his dying words, he told a Sherpa his name was Дэвид Шарп, and he was with Asian Trekking.
Everest is an incredibly brutal place. Until you've been there, you don't know what it's like. You don't know how difficult it is to actually survive at that altitude.
Ingalls was now suffering severe frostbite, and the descent was becoming a nightmare. On his damaged stumps, he was finding it increasingly difficult to walk.
I was having to stop and lift one leg up. I do call it the seagull walk. Just take the pressure off. And put that leg down and lift up the other leg, take the pressure off. And so that's when the boys came up with the toboggan. And it's like, away you go.
After hours of excruciating pain, Ingalls could go no further. And with only 200 meters to camp, the team came to his rescue.
The boys picked me up, and before I knew it, I was on Perna's back as he danced down the moraine and into camp.
It's why you don't climb alone, so that those around you can address the issues before it's too late. When I got down, I just knew which had been the significant thing for me that day. It wasn't about summiting or anything like that. It was about what I'd encountered and shared in an incredibly limited way with another human. And whether and how I felt about that, that was consuming me, It
was actually while sitting there waiting at ABC that we found out that the guy up on the mountain in Green Boots Cave had died. Russell had actually had to go out and find out who it was.
No one knew about Дэвид Шарп until he was dead. Even the people on his expedition. They didn't know about him until he was actually dead.
Ingalls returned to New Zealand a hero.
Good to be home.
Bloody good to be home.
But as news of Sharp's death emerged, his high public profile saw many turn against him.
Has commercial mountaineering made climbing the world's most heartless pursuit. Today, Mark Inglis was heavily criticised for not saving a dying British climber.
That was the start of several very long months. In hospital, the fingers, they'd starting to blacken up and demarcate, and knew I'd been losing the tips of them. The stumps, that was the big surprise, really. I'd put the bones right through the ends of the stumps.
Yep, underneath this thing here, it's all open. It's all open.
Over that 2 months in hospital, I went through several operations, but effectively just had 3 centimetres cut off each of the ends of the stumps.
It's just been shortened, so I won't have the leverage. So I'll go for, I'll go for a shorter leg.
Shorter, shorter. But while Ingles's medical issues were being treated, he received another shock.
We got a phone call, terrible news. And they said, Sir Ed's criticised you. Sir Edmund Hillary's come out in the media and has, criticised your expedition.
I think Mark Inglis was a bit crazy. He put in a great battle to reach the summit. But I don't approve of the fact that he just rang up base camp and said, well, the fellow up here, what do I do about it? And the head of the expedition said, oh, he's been there long enough now, he'll be dead, so don't worry about it. I mean, that attitude is, to me, is pathetic. He was a human being, and we would regard it as our duty to get him back to safety.
Дэвид Шарп died on Mount Everest. It had nothing to do with us or Mark Inglis. Unfortunately, some members of the public seem to think that it's Ingles's fault that the guy died. It's Ingles's fault that he couldn't carry him down.
Do I blame the people who walked past him? No. Did David expect to be rescued? Absolutely not. He was clear to me that he understood the risks. He did not want to endanger anyone else.
I guess another sort of twisted irony of the whole situation is that then a week later, the Australian Lincoln Hall survives the night up there and is brought down. But the major difference is he could walk. He was communicating. He was away with the fairies and had frostbite, but it still took 15-odd Sherpas, lots of oxygen, and 20-odd hours to get him back down. But he could move. And the night that he spent out was certainly not as cold as the night that we had when we summited.
In terms of, this is down the barrel, right? In terms of Дэвид Шарп dying, one group have not really been represented here, and it's the agents that took the man's money and let him go to Everest. We've got websites that are scathing about Bryce in terms of Дэвид Шарп. And yet, what about Asian Trekking? They took the man's money. They said, yep, you can go to Everest. Ask them about their rescue infrastructure. They've got Sherpas. I mean, God, there's Sherpas own the company.
Of the fatalities and of the rescues that we've carried out over the years, Asian Trekking have been the majority, have caused the majority of these. So that's their style of running an expedition, and they obviously get clients to do that.
When no one from Asian Trekking was prepared to gather the dead man's belongings, the task fell to Bryce.
Дэвид Sharp's parents have been very understanding about the whole situation, and I've been very open to them about everything I've happened and how it happened and so on. So they've been quite understanding and, in actual fact, quite annoyed with the attention that the media have put onto this because they felt that their son was a climber, and it was unfortunate that he died as a climber.
Now, we can't sort of create barriers or walls of cotton wool where we can all go there safely and come home alive. People don't find that challenging enough. Individual people want things to be harder for them because they have a greater sense of achievement when they've attained their goal.
I mean, it's a controversial issue and it'll always remain so. But as I say, those are the cold, hard facts of life at 8,000 metres. You're in the death zone. Shit goes wrong. People die. It's a graveyard up there, and it's really difficult to be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think it's a microcosm of the whole world. You know, what's changed on that mountain has changed with the rest of society, and Sured's observations are on the money. You know, there is a certain desensitization that's gone on, but it's not limited to the people who climb on that mountain. It's the world, it's us as a whole.